Whether it's the path to financial independence or just getting a bit more control, it can be difficult to know where to start when managing your finances. With temptation to spend everywhere and seemingly mixed messages about, in this video I'm going to break down the 3 golden rules of personal finance. Hi, my name's George Agan and I'm a chartered financial planner. So before I go into these rules, I want to give credit to these rules to one of my personal mentors in financial planning, Pete Matthews. Pete runs a podcast called Meaningful Money, which I've been listening to for many years. This isn't a sponsored post or anything like that, but if you do enjoy the information in this video or a good podcast, I suggest you check it out or get his book. So rule 1, spend less than you earn. Everything to do with personal finance has to do with control. You need to get a handle of what's coming in and what's going out. So the first thing to do is to set a spending plan. Without having an understanding of this, it's going to be nearly impossible to handle the ups and downs that will come along the way and make the absolute most of what you can of your personal finance journey. There are some really good apps out there. However, to start, it doesn't have to be complicated. The simplest way to do this is just to track what you spend. So for a month, go through your bank statements and put them into lists with your core bills, so things such as food, council tax, electricity, water and broadband. And then discretionary, so things that you might be able to go without. If you haven't done this before, it's a really useful exercise in itself, and you'll start to get a handle of how consistent your spending is. And you'll probably find out a few things you weren't expecting from this alone. Do this for about 3 months, and by the end of it, you should have a good idea of what your average spending pattern looks like. The thing is, this might provide some insight, and whatever the result, perhaps you've got a very predictable spending pattern, or perhaps it's all over the place. Either way, understanding this and ultimately yourself can be the first point to getting a bit more control. How your finances will end up is all about the relationship with your future self. The aim is to put yourself in a position where you're increasing your savings rate, basically the percentage of income that you earn that you save, and it'll really help you in the long run if you can increase that. So a few things that have helped me have been paying yourself first. I know this might seem like a trivial thing to do, but it really does work. Commit yourself to a savings level and automate your savings. This can be as simple as, once you have a spending plan worked out on what you feel you can realistically save, move this into a separate savings account with your bank as soon as you get paid. It's not just about personal accounting why this can work. It can trigger a psychological advantage as well. In the book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, Robert B. Cialdini mentioned that we as humans generally don't like breaking prior commitments. Most of us are wired to think automatically that us being consistent with our prior commitments is a positive thing. Because look, let's be honest, no one likes a flake. Use this to your advantage. Set up a savings plan as a promise to your future self. Even the act of moving that money across will help you towards your adherence to the goal. And as long as it's instant access, if you can't meet your goals 1 month, you can always take it back out. It's about removing the resistance that might occur that's standing in the way of your long-term goals, because look, temptation's everywhere. So do yourself a favour and make it as easy for yourself as possible to establish these good habits. And after you've done that, address any debts. Or more specifically, look to reduce high interest debt. Some debt is unavoidable and can be even seen as good debt. If you're a homeowner, you like to have a mortgage, but if you are paying debt on a really high interest rate, such as credit cards or payday loans, then you need to be really wary of this, as debt in this position is going to drag down your net worth over time, as chances are the interest rate that's applied against you is going to be much higher than you can invest and achieve. If we use an assumption using global equity returns from Vanguard's Global Economic Market Outlook paper, they estimate about 4.5 to 6.5% return a year. If we compare that to the figures from the Money charity, said in February 2020, the average credit card interest rate was 20.77. It's easy to see that comparison. It's only going to go one way. There's lots of potential ways to reduce the debt burden, whether it's transferring to a 0% credit card if you've got the credit rating to do so, or other debt restructuring options through your bank. But if debt's becoming a real problem for you, then I would always suggest getting external help. It's one of those things that won't go away, and if you ignore it at the end of the day, build up, and there are organisations out there like Citizens Advice or the charity Step Change who can help you get guidance in this area. So I've talked about reducing outgoings. You can of course improve the situation by increasing your earnings, and this could be by investing in yourself, by improving your earnings potential, maybe picking up another job or a side hustle, but it's easier said than done. So rule 2, protect against disaster. Probably one of the most underappreciated areas of personal finance is protecting the downside. This is your human capital, and in my view, if you're not doing that adequately, then frankly the other steps can be a waste of time, as the plan isn't really built on a strong foundation. And all these other steps could get wiped out by a misfortune. Think about it, if your ability to earn was defined as an asset, it's probably the most valuable asset you own. We seem to regularly get insurances for our phone, house, car insurance, pets, but maybe not for you. So let me show you why that matters. For most of us, when we start our lives, our human capital is high, but our level of assets is relatively low. As we work through life and get older, that balance starts to shift until retirement, where hopefully we've amassed enough assets to live off. The reality is our human capital at that point has almost diminished, as we've only got a few years that we can or that we're willing to work. So insurance in that period where your human capital is high, which is the start, or where you have dependents who rely on you, is one of the best and cheapest ways to protect the downside. Because you can, for example, have savings and investments, but if something were to happen, you might have to encash them all. When in the early stage of life, it's not really possible or practical for most of us to be able to do that. So your insurance costs generally depend on your health, your age, and the level of cover you get. But to quickly summarise, the main three insurances most people consider are: so number one, life insurance. And simple enough, it pays out a lump sum if you die, but you can get the payments via a steady stream of income through what's called family income benefit. So the first question is, do you have dependents that you need to look after should you pass away? A lot of times people cover their mortgage, but would clearing the mortgage alone be enough if there was a permanent loss to your income? Again, going back to the human capital example, the loss of your income could be quite substantial depending on when something happens. So number two is income protection. And this generally pays out an income if you're unable to work due to illness or injury, and can actually pay you all the way up to retirement age if you select that term. The income payable is tax-free, usually if you pay for the policy, but if your employer provides it, it can be taxable. There'll be a deferral period, which means the period you need to be off before the cover kicks in. The longer the deferral period, the cheaper the policy will be. Generally, it makes sense to align this to when your employer pays sick pay, but it depends on your own position. There's a cap for how much cover you can get. Usually it's about 60 to 70% of pre-tax earnings. You have to have an incentive to return to work. And if you are fully covered for the income, that might not happen. So check what the incapacity definition is as well, because this can differ. You can have own occupation, which means you're off until you can return to your current occupation. Any occupation, which means you can be employed as a paperweight if it gets you back into work. And then work tasks, which is the least generous and means if you can't complete a set list of tasks like walking up the stairs or maybe holding a pen. One tip to be aware of is there are lots of products out there which are marketed as income protection, which only cover you up to periods of 2 years. These are normally called accident, sickness and employment cover, or ASU. That's hugely different if you think about it, because being covered until you're off until your retirement age, very different compared to just 2 years. Number three, critical illness. As the name suggests, it generally pays out a lump sum in the event of the diagnosis of a critical illness. And that definition of what is a critical illness will vary from provider, so make sure you check the terms on yours. So the first thing I want to address is, look, the general mistrust there is of the insurances and insurance industry. And look, I get it. We're all worried about the perception that insurers are not going to pay when we need it most. Well, the truth is that isn't really a fair representation at all of the data anyway. The Association for British Insurers showed that in 2019, the industry paid out 98.3% on all claims, which is more than 5.7 billion. And if I'm being honest, that was a lot higher than I was expecting when I was looking into it. Now, that is by no means to say you can take that and assume you'll be fine. You obviously have to disclose all the relevant facts and if in doubt, get advice. But the idea that insurers just don't pay out isn't accurate. And actually the legislation is very much in your favour as a consumer, as long as you read the terms and tell the truth. The next thing to do is take a good hard look at benefits like employment support allowance, personal independence payments, statutory sick pay, and see how that stacks up to the budgeting you did. Check what your employer offers you and how long you would last if something bad were to happen. What I can tell you is that it'll never feel good paying for insurance, but if you don't cover yourself, you're making the mistake of thinking it won't ever happen to me. You have to understand that the point is that we don't know what's coming around the corner, and look, it's ultimately up to you. But if you're investing and you haven't protected yourself, and the truth is you risk years of hard work, savings and investments being wiped out by misfortune or illness. So rule 3, build your savings and invest wisely. As you'll probably find, this topic is very broad and it's one that we'll dip into on other videos. But the first thing to do is to build an emergency fund, and generally 3 to 6 months is a normal guide. Once you've done this, it's important to understand that it's nearly impossible to save your way to wealth. So here I just want to address why you might need to invest or be thinking about it. And firstly, there are many ways to invest wisely. It can be through your education in your own business, or maybe just through the general markets. 2 main forces you need to be aware of are inflation and compounding. Inflation is the general increase in the price of goods and services over time, and compounding is the process where assets generate additional earnings over time as a product of reinvested gains or income, and it can lead to almost exponential results. But compounding can work both ways, from investment growth but also to the impact of debt or charges for you. There's a quote from Albert Einstein where he calls it the 8th wonder of the world, saying, "He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it." Now I'm going to skip over the blatant sexism here, but the most important thing to understand is how much or little money you have. Time has value. This is a particularly big issue now because the interest rate you can get on your cash is barely enough, or is often much lower than the rate of inflation. So I'm a financial planner, so I'm going to talk to you about how you should maybe be thinking about it from a planning perspective with your money. In normal life, we don't often get to see or visualize what's called the cost of inaction. That's not the actual projected cost, but the cost compared to an alternative route. Let me show you. Let's imagine we have two routes based on a reasonable but very simple assumption starting with £10,000. Route 1, if you hold your funds in cash, earn 1% interest and inflation is 2%. This is a projection of low inflation compared to historic standards, but it's reasonable to where we are now. So route 2, I'll mirror a return expectation as far as using the global equity returns taken from Vanguard's economic market outlook paper, where they estimate an average return about 5.5% a year. So that's a real return of 3% after we applied the 2% inflation, and I put 0.5% for charges. So in route 1, inflation is compounding against you. In the other example, the growth is compounding for you. Because the impact of inflation, these are the real terms figures, so the actual buying power figures that you would get at the end of that period. For 10 years, we've got £4,395.34, 30 years at £16,000, £875.62, and 60 years, £53,444.46. That was just £10,000 that we started with. So as you can probably see, the impact of your wealth may be what you're contributing to a pension, or maybe the wealth that you're looking to build over time for your family. Now look, the trade-off is that you will be taking a level of risk when you're investing. And I'm not trying to say whether investing is right for you. You're obviously not going to be guaranteed a return if you invest in the markets. I mean, why would the markets give you a positive return without you taking any risk? But it's just something to think about because it's something that we don't often see very often. So they've been the 3 golden rules. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did happen to like that video, it would be appreciated if you could like or share it with anyone you know. See you next time. Thank you.